guys! So today we're going to be talking about Judaism, or the religion of the Jewish people. So last time we talked about Israel and we talked about Jerusalem. So we talked about where these people lived, but today we're going to talk about what they believed. So Judaism is the religion of the ancient Israelites. It is set apart from other religions by the covenant between the Israelites and their God. So what makes it different from a bunch of other ancient religions is that the Jews spoke to their God and made an agreement with him. So God promised to make them ruler over their enemies, but only if they followed his laws. So if they did not follow God's laws and God's commandments, then they would be slaves to their enemies. And so throughout their history, they say that that's why they go from being in charge to being enslaved. And then they're in charge again, and then they're enslaved again. The Jewish say that it's because when they were doing what God told them to do, they were in charge. When they weren't doing what God told them to do, they weren't in charge. So, in case you don't know what covenant means, a covenant is a contract or an agreement. So basically in the Torah, when they're talking about having made a covenant with God, they're saying that they talked to God and he promised them something. So the Torah is the Old Testament of the Bible. So the first half of the Bible, pretty much the same as the Torah. It tells us the history of the Jewish people. It's used by historians to help them understand ancient history because many of the events have been found to be true. I told you this last time, but I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you some specific things that we know are true from the Old Testament. So the story of Jonah is oftentimes argued about whether or not it's true. But we've actually found in recent years that there are a lot of stories of people who were swallowed by whales or big fish and managed to survive. The story of Moses. In the Red Sea, which is the sea that Moses parts at the end of the story of them leaving Egypt and going into the desert, he parts the Red Sea and the Israelites cross, but the sea closes around the Egyptians. In the Red Sea, we have found chariots, armor, weapons, and the skeletons of both humans and of horses. So that's made some historians believe that maybe they don't believe that Moses took a stick and told the water to move, and it did, but they do believe that something definitely happened there because we found evidence that the chase where the Egyptians are chasing the Israelites through the water happened. There has to be some explanation for it, and some historians look to the Torah. And then the last one, movement of ancient people, is mostly accurate to our knowledge. So we know that a lot of what they say in the Torah is actually what happened because we know where the people were from using other ancient books. We kind of have an idea of who's in charge, where people are at from old books. But the Torah is usually the most accurate because the Jewish people are writing down their whole history. The next thing that sets them apart are the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments, exactly the same as they were in the Bible, they're Judaism's divine laws on the right ways to act towards God and towards other people. So they're what the Jews use to help them understand how they need to act and how they need to be towards others. So they believe that if you follow the commandments of God, then you will be blessed by God, because that's what their covenant with God said. And then the last thing that sets them apart are prophets. There are a lot of religions that have prophets, people who talk for the gods. But Israel, or the Jewish people, really have one that sets them apart, because their God tells them things, and a lot of times it's right. Like we talked about Joseph and his coat of many colors, having dreams, or being able to interpret dreams and then them happening. In the story of Abraham, God tells Abraham he's going to have many children, and then Abraham does. He tells him that they're going to become the different tribes of Israel, and then his children do become the leaders of the tribes. Samuel has a lot of visions and dreams, and they come true. So that's something that kind of sets them apart from other people who are saying that they're having visions. So the Jewish prophets advise people on how to live and how to follow God's calling for them as a group. So a lot of times there's a prophet who tells them, hey, this is what we should do, and then they listen. In most of the stories in the Bible and in the Torah about battles, there's usually a prophet who tells them how to act in the battle, and then the commander of the military, or the commander of the army, whatever they're using, usually listens to the prophet, and if they listen, they win, and if they don't, they lose. So we see those kinds of things all over that text. So this is kind of an overview of Judaism, because we're going to talk more about it later in the year. There are 3 Abrahamic faiths, so 3 religions that come from the story of Abraham, and they all have the story of Abraham. And so we're going to talk about all 3 of them, but for us to understand the other 2, we first have to know a little bit about Judaism. So we'll come back to the Jews and talk about them a little bit more later, but for right now, this is the base information you need to know to understand them. So for today, what I want you to think about is, I want you to think about what we talked about today, and also things that you've already learned about the Jews. Because since you have Bible class, I know that you've talked about the Jews at least once. So I want you to think about what you know about them, what you learned about them today, and if you would like to, you're more than welcome to look things up about them to answer this. But you definitely have enough resources to know answers. I want you to think about what the key characteristics of the Jewish people are. So think about 3 things that you think are important characteristics of the Jewish people. All right? If you have any questions, let me know, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.